new to this technology. He is not new to this family. He is not new
Yeah.
to this club. He's actually being chased. I must confess, I'm chasing very hard to get him to finally see himself in this club as a card carrying member and as a leader in Saljak. But let me just say welcome to you, Mr. Mncwango, and welcome to Saljak again leadership. And the members and leaders of Saljak are here, Facebook Live. Some are here. They are busy joining the lecture. Today's very, very critical and important lecture is on a topic that is less traveled in our cycles. Not much is being said about it, or not much it's considered academic of some kind, the topic of eugenics. And I couldn't think of anyone else who would be presenting this topic other than yourselves. And I'm very excited that when I pick up the phone and ask you to do a presentation on this topic, after smiling and laughing, you agreed to the challenge and say, no, absolutely, I'll take it. And for that, we are very, very excited, and we are humbled that you always stand up when we require you to come. And every time I think of this topic of eugenics, I think of Shakespeare's uh, writings when he said, "Hell is empty and all the devils are here." It's every time I. Yeah, so I'm not going to go much into this topic because you are here as our expert to take us through it. But for those who are new here at Saljek and those who have forgotten who you are, I'm just going to quickly read your bio. It's very short, so that everybody remembers who you are. Uh, Uvezi Mncwango, it's our speaker today and our lecture. Is a founder and director of a Thought Coach, a company whose primary goal is to facilitate the alignment of organizational systems and mindset for a ecological enhancement of all stakeholders' value in workplace. Vezi is also a co-founder of Ubuntu Git Network, a non-profit organization that advocates for the advancement of Ubuntu consciousness. Vezi is a leadership coach and a professional associate at GIPS, the Business School of University of Pretoria, where he coaches and integrates on leadership. Vezi is certified master coach in neuro-linguistic programming. He also holds a BCom accounting degree from UKZN. Vezi is also traveled, having worked throughout Africa, the Middle East, and many parts of Europe. Vezi has authored 2 books, Transforming Glory and Vessel of Glory. These are books about people who can transform and be a reflection of God's love for humanity. Very, very interesting to talk about God's love for humanity. Our topic today, it's, in my opinion, it's a topic of anti-human behavior and actions by a certain group of people. I won't go further or much into this topic. I'll just let leadership visit to just lay right on it away. I would ask everyone, every single one of us, to just take a pad and a pen, jot as much minutes down and points down, so that once he's done, we'll be able to fire him with some questions just to clarify this, because these are topics that I personally believe that they are family topics. You need to be coming with your family and friends to sit and get educated on such issues, because they happen just under our nose and we're not aware of them. But
Yes.
let me allow you to lay it right away, leadership. The platform is all yours.
Thank you, leadership. Once more, I just want to appreciate the role that you play um, in our society, getting us together on a cold Sunday afternoon to
Yeah,
the fireplace of knowledge,
very.
um, and getting us to really think about, as you put it, things that are often not talked about, yet are so pervasive in their impact in our society. So I just want to really acknowledge you and the South African leadership gentlemen's club for this really important work. Um, it may be cold outside this afternoon, yet we are really dealing with a hot topic here. And as you said, Chairperson, um, I do request that you kind of take notes. I'm gonna be going quite briskly in quite a number of important topics because I really want to get us uh, a, um, to a conversation about how we navigate some of the challenges that face us as leaders. So thank you. I just wanted to acknowledge that to your leadership. Secondly, before I start, I just want to say that as leaders, uh, we we need to continuously be challenging in ourselves. And so the conversation that we are going to have today is really my intention is provocation. The topic we are dealing with is vast. Its history is extensive. I will share with you some recommended readings. And so I would like you to look at our conversation today as a starter conversation. So we are not going to arrive at answers of any extensive proportion. However, I think this conversation will just dial up our awareness on a number of important things that as leaders we need to be aware of. So in terms of our agenda then, I then greet everyone. Um, Greet everyone who is on the call. And I know, Sunday afternoon is sacred for a lot of people. And so I always appreciate when people take time to invest in leadership growth. I know some people right now, they are just kind of, relaxing because tomorrow they're back to work. But I really want to acknowledge all of those that are in attendance and appreciate that you've joined us in this conversation, and those that are also watching on Facebook now or later. Thank you for investing in this time to just wade through this very complex topic. So the first thing I want to address, so I'm just sharing the agenda now. So the first thing I want to address is why this topic. It's a curious topic because it's not something that people often talk about, but I want to make a case that this is a very important topic, which is why leadership, your provocation for me was quite important. I would have wanted to have 3 months to prepare for this, but I think, it's a starter conversation and we may well conclude that we need to talk more about it in the future. So I then, once I lay out the case of why this topic, we're going to talk about the genesis, history, and evolution of this science, debunked science of eugenics. And you'll see why this is important. I'm going to make a case that when we start to understand how a theory or how a practice rather, such as eugenics, was advocated and perpetuated and cultured in the Western society. This then brings some important questions about our epistemology. How do we know what we know? And so I will then make a case that the lessons we're going to draw from this history of the science of debunked science of eugenics get us to a stark reality about how we know what we know. It's all going to make sense when we get there. And then I then want to move on to make another case that right now we are facing what I call an information chasm that may well be a huge, another additional huge societal divide, and this is the on vaccination. So, and I will bring the link of the interface between the debunked science of eugenics and the contemporary narratives on eugenics and sorry on vaccines, and why this becomes a challenge for a leader in the 21st century. And then I'm going to just then leave you with my final thoughts on, so how do we navigate a world that is clearly increasingly polarized, and where we have this information chasm. And so my hope is that at the end of this session, I would have provoked you into dialing up your awareness of the world around you, and how we make decisions, and how we know what we know, and what we do when we leave or when we lead teams, whether it's in the corporate space, it's in the church, it's in our community. How do we lead people where there's this, what I call the information chasm, a divide? And so that's my agenda, chairperson, for this afternoon. And so I will then launch right away into our conversation by yes, sir. You, chairperson, were you saying something?
No, I was saying, yeah,
okay.
let's just get into it.
Let's do it.
Yeah,
yes,
let's do this.
So why this topic? Why is this topic relevant and important? And I just want to do this by way of some news headlines. So we know that particularly for you people in Gauteng, you are not listening. We are seeing an increasing a number of people that are testing positive for COVID. And as of course, in a typical magnanimous news headlines, it's starting to engulf. And of course, this is a bit of an exaggeration, but the issue here is that we are starting to see what a lot of people have feared might be the third wave. Now, I will not make our conversation a debate about what's right or wrong, what's proper and improper. I want to position a landscape that we need to navigate as leaders. And I want to leave you with the thoughts about what we need to be thinking about as leaders as we navigate this landscape. Okay, so, and what we are also seeing is what they call a vaccine hesitancy. And this is not just in South Africa, but we can see that in Canada and the US, there is a vaccine hesitancy. And so the stats that are coming out of South Africa is that more than 70% are okay with being vaccinated. But what's also clear, a lot of people are saying these deaths may be a little bit more than what, there may be more people that object to the vaccines than you may think. So I know right now some of you may be listening and saying, but what's this got to do with eugenics? Just be patient with me, walk with me here. I'm gonna get to that. Okay, so I want to give you a scenario, which I am facing right now, that I am facilitating and leading 3 international programs in my work with GIBS. And one of the challenges that we face is that these international programs require, as part of the curriculum, for us to go to a country. It could be another country in the continent or around the world. And so the international component of these programs that I'm facilitating means that we have to travel abroad for immersion to learn. Now, because of the pandemic, and as you know, the requirement for many countries to be vaccinated, this raises a dilemma. What do you do with people who feel that they cannot be vaccinated, or who are not agreeable to the vaccinations? How do you bring the international learning element to them? Constitutionally, no one can be forced, and I know this is still a debate to vaccinate, but the practical implications is that if you've registered for a program and its component contains a requirement that requires for you to travel, but for you to travel, you require vaccine, what do you do? I am also facing a dilemma because I live in a household where my wife says you can't be vaccinated. I don't believe in vaccination. And if I make a decision that I won't be vaccinated, that means all my work, I cannot continue with my work. I need to hand over. I need to find some other work. So such is the dilemma that us as leaders are navigating right now because of the changes and what we are seeing with the disruption of the pandemic. Secondly, we are what I call a cusp of a societal divide. And why? Because you as corporate leaders, as church leaders and community leaders, we may well come to a place where establishments, such as education institutions and entertainment houses and social places can say that you may or may not enter, or you may or may not participate on the basis of whether or not you are vaccinated. And so what we may well see, and I pray and hope that we don't get there, but this is a reality. What we may come to see, and we're already seeing this in the European countries, is where this whole question of vaxxed or not becomes a significantly dividing issue. And thirdly, we, as a result, because I think there's an understanding that this is a big question that now hangs on our consciousness. And so as a result, our minds, your WhatsApp right now, your WhatsApp groups, we have become the playground of these fierce ideological agendas. And so as a leader, how do you navigate that? You're going to be in a group and you're going to see one person or your Facebook friend being on the wrong side. So how do you deal with that as a leader? Okay. And so we are faced with this question. We are demanded to either submit or resist. And all of these ideological agendas and this narrative come to this conclusion. You better submit because it's good for the whole society, or you better resist because you are falling into the agenda of the powerful. And so this is what we are faced with, I think, as leaders and humanity. And here, this is, so I just want to remind all of you that this is a leadership club. This is a leadership conversation. So this is not about vaccines. I would dare say this is not even about eugenics. Eugenics is going to be our reference point for this conversation, but it's about how do we lead in these times. And so yes, so I think that the provocation that we're gonna find in this conversation is gonna come down to in this conversation we can never exhaust about whether you should be against or for. That's for you, that's the homework you need to do. But the question that we need to be able to talk about is, how do we lead in these times? Okay, so I want to then kick off or continue then and then link. Sorry, I want to just then connect. So why this topic and what does it have to do with eugenics? And this is what I think is important for us to understand, is that I think when we look at the science of eugenics, so what's this got to do with eugenics? The first thing is that it has, this is a science that, science in brackets because it's been debunked, but it is what has given birth to modern population control theories, okay? And at the heart of the objections to vaccinations and a lot of the other population control mechanisms such as sterilization, abortion, birth control, a lot of the objections are linked to this fear that there is an elite that seeks to control the population and therefore control the resources and the world. Okay, so now eugenics was a science birthed or developed. It was at its genesis, and we're going to talk about it. It sought to address what they called, these scientists, the survival of the human species. And I'm going to explain in what context was that. But it was essentially about the gene pool, that you want the best gene pool to reproduce. And therefore, what it means is that for you to have the best to reproduce, you need to be able to control who reproduces. And therefore, because if, so the theory was that if we have the sprawling of the poor, for example, and the Africans and the Jews, and we're going to talk about that a little bit, then that is going to pollute the European white perfect gene pool. And so this was seen as a real threat to the survival of the human species. So that was the context. Okay, so now this was an agenda of the world elite. Now, what I need you to understand as we get into this subject is that the world elite were not secretive about their support for eugenics. For example, in 1911, the first conference in London on eugenics was attended by the who's who of the world. European leaders hosted by Sir Winston Churchill. We had ambassadors from Norway, from Sweden. We had the who's who of the science, the son of the writer of The Origin of Species, Adam, what's his name? I forget his name. But so the who's who of the world elite, they were not secretive about this ideal that they had come to believe in, that the world needed to be rid of bad genes, third world Africans and all the other races. So this wasn't a secret thing. It wasn't, it was a common cause. It was, so this is the thing, when you read history, this is all airbrushed, yet this was so blatant. It was on your face at the time, but history has done its best to airbrush all of these things that clearly were the agenda of the elite. Okay, so the history, we know in history, it's well documented, it's empirically evidence that eugenics was disastrous. So as some of you may know, that this was epitomized by Hitler's Germany when they exterminated 6 million Jews. Now, Hitler was a great student of eugenics. In his book, there's a book that he used to carry called the passing the passing of the European or something like that. It was written by a eugenicist who advocated that the era of the white man was to come to an end. And so Hitler took up that as his struggle. And he said he is going to work to exterminate anything that is not what he called the Aryan race, the white European Aryan race. And so, so this was epitomized. So, you know, when you read history, history presents Hitler as an anomaly, you know, something that just came out of the blue, such evil man who had his, you know, no one knew what his agenda was. And so you will read history as if Hitler is this anomaly, you know, an abomination in society. Yet Hitler was the culmination of everything that universities, medical institutes, societies of great thinkers, philosophy. He was the culmination of Western thought, Western moral thought about how humanity should survive. And so, why am I saying all of this, and what is the link with my introduction? I am saying that there are many skeptics today and anti-vaccine activists who fear that this what do we call this, malignant way of thinking about preserving the survival of humanity may still well exist. And so there are people who genuinely think that could vaccines be another evolved, sophisticated form of eugenics? Okay, and so this is the link between my context, which I laid, and what I'm going to share now about the history of eugenics. And so what I'm wanting you to do is to just keep in mind this context and keep in mind that this talk is actually not about vaccines. It's not even about, the details of eugenics, but it's what should we be learning from this history as leaders. And so, and I think that it's going to help us. There's a great deal we can learn about how our world works from the history of eugenics, and therefore how we then navigate this world as leaders. Okay, some recommended readings that I have drawn. So I just want everyone to know here that everything I'm going to say here is drawn from empirically evidence work and data. So I am not here presenting anything that is, I ensure that whenever I'm going to share, whatever I'm going to share, it is, I draw it from sources that I know are empirically evidenced and that have been written by people that are credible, that have a standing and that have a track record. And so the three books I'm therefore going to share for your recommended reading. The first one is called The Myth of Race. A lot of what I'm going to share about the history of eugenics is drawn from this book. Robin Wald-Sussman, a very well-known, credible anthropologist, and he writes extensively, and he brings in the records, the detailed records of the history and evolution of eugenics. I highly recommend this book. You don't understand how the world works until you read this book. And I really highly recommend it. So if you look at the topic, it says The Myth of Race, and the reason he's titled that way is because he's following the whole thread of how the whole thing about race. I mean, race, if you know this, the concept of race was actually invented somewhere in the 15th century. Prior to that, people did not identify themselves by race or by skin color, rather by geography and other things. So he does such a fantastic job in just developing an argument about just how mythical this whole concept of race is. So read this book. I think you will appreciate what I'm talking about. The second book that I think I highly recommend for you to read is Who Rules the World? Now, Chomsky is, of course, he's considered a leftist philosopher in the American sectors. But, when you really read Chomsky, you're going to start to realize he's neither left nor right. He critiques everything that is not aligned with taking, with the common good of mankind. And so in this book, Who Rules the World, Chomsky presents a formidable case about who really controls the world, the resources, who shapes the policies. So our government, for example, who shapes which vaccine they are procuring. So and you need to read this book to really appreciate the the cascade of decision making in our world. The last book, which really it's more a psychological, socio-psychological book by Jonathan Haidt. It is The Righteous Mind. It's a book on identity. So why we get divided so easily. And really, I'm recommending this because I think that as leaders, we will find that this is in this time, we need to be able to navigate about our sense of identity. How do we identify who we are, and how does our identity impact us? And therefore, how do we lead in a different context? So those are the three books, and I'm drawing in one form or another from these three books in this particular conversation. Okay, so now let's get back to the whole issue of the eugenics. So I'm gonna take you through a brisk journey through the history of eugenics, and I am just doing this as an intro, as a starter. I think a lot of what if you are, this is a subject that interests you, I would really recommend that you read that book on the myth of race. So, and I think I'm a student of history, so I like to always start at the beginning. So, the issue of humankind believing they are superior to others is an old thing. So whether you start with the Moors, the Moors were the Africans that colonized Europe. I know some of you may not know that Africa actually once colonized Europe, but read on that. Egyptians had an empire that colonized also part of the Middle East. Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Romans. So this is in the time of Jesus coming. So one thing that threads through all empires was a sense of superiority, and therefore a sense of, we need to annex you, we need to civilize you, and we're going to collect taxes from. So it's an old thing, the whole thing of human superiority. However, where this started to get an evolution was when in the time of Alexander the Great. So this is about 300 BC, where Greece now started to export its culture. Okay, so because they were saying we have they had people like Socrates and Plato, and really they believe that we are superior. We think. We are great thinkers, and so they started to export their culture to the Middle East, to Europe, to Africa. For example, in Africa, we've got a city called Alexandria, right at the top of the Mediterranean Sea. So what we are seeing here is this was during this Alexandra. As he colonized, they started to export this Greek culture, and this changed the world significantly. So, those that don't know, I asked my children the other day, do you know what language Jesus spoke? And they said, Hebrew, and I said, yes, but every day, what did he speak? And they said, so I had to tell them that Jesus spoke Greek. And so like us here, Jesus was colonized. He spoke a foreign language. And I was telling my kids that the only times when you hear Jesus quoted in speaking in Hebrew was when things were really, really, serious. Like when he was hanging on the cross, he then cries in Hebrew, or when he was raising that young woman. I digress. My apologies. But my point is that the Greeks had exported this culture even in the time of Jesus throughout the known world at the time. And so what they then introduced was this notion of assimilation, which is a thing that we find to this day, where if you adopt my culture, I'm going to accept you as an equal. But before you adopt my culture, you are a pagan. You are inferior to me. So that's what Greeks introduced to us. Now, I'm jumping all the way to the 15th century because that's when we started to see the genesis of, or what we would say, the precursor of racism. So now, interestingly, it was the church. It was in the church where racism was born. And it's probably still in the church where it thrives the most. So the Spanish Inquisitions, what was happening there is that there were a lot of Jews. Now, this was in Spain. Now, the Jews had fled to Spain because of persecution, and so some of the Jews started to convert into Catholicism, and the Jews were prosperous, and so some of the Spanish elite started to feel jealous, and so they wanted to find a way to limit these the rights of these converts, and so they started to say, if you have a Jewish blood in your past 5 generations, you have limited rights. You can't be a full Catholic. You can't be a full Christian. Or if you are from Africa, you can't. So these inquisitions were really about inquiring into your genealogy so that you could be, your rights curtailed, or some of them, many died during these inquisitions, including Africans. And so however, this was still more just a cultural artifact, but where really the birth of what we could call scientific racism today, it was developed in the 18th and in the 18th century by the German and French scientists, who advocated, of course, that European whites were superior human variety. And so all other races, they call them a degenerated variety. Now, you must remember, these were eminent scientists. This was work done in universities, okay? Now, this is the era where what we call inductive reasoning. So I could make an argument, this goes all the way to Aristotle, where all I needed to establish the theory, or a scientific theory, was to make a logical argument. So it's not because they had any proof of human, white superiority, but they theorized that, only whites have only invented anything. Okay, so I'm going to try and go a little bit more brisker. So now there was the next stage of the evolution of the scientific racism was in the 18th and 19th century. So philosophers started weighing into this superiority of the European. And so David Hume and Immanuel Kant were the foremost philosophers that started to develop what is called moral theories on this. And they started, so they basically started to say that only European whites are moral. Everyone else is what they call amoral. So in almost, they actually categorized other human varieties as closer to dogs than them. And so now this is the interesting thing. both these philosophers are celebrated worldwide. You go to any philosophy class today, you pull up any philosophic theory, they are underpinned by the great contributions of these two men and others, of course. What you won't find in these great books that exalt the work of humankind and others is this grisly belief that they held about their own superiority. So now there's a quote which I was looking for earlier, I couldn't find, where Kant, they say Kant is even today, he is regarded as a father of Western moral theory. And so this quote says, but he's also the father of philosophical racism. Now, the same father of Western moral theory, which underpins how we function as society today, is the same birthplace of philosophical racism.
Wow.
So now, as I said, up to now, these were theories, right? They were theories which were taught in the corridors of the universities. But now, at the 10th, in the late 19th century, these theories now were empirically evidenced. In other words, the proof was documented by a certain scientist, I think White, I forget his name, but he actually started measuring the craniums, so the brain craniums, where he hypothesized that, and proved, by the way, through his data, that Europeans had bigger brains and therefore therefore superior reasoning. And so this was epitomized by a book, that's still, you can still find it on Amazon today, called Types of Men. And really, this was a book that presented evidence on the superiority of the white man. So now, parallel to all of these developments, there were some scientists, because this was now common narrative that the races, there was the white superior race and all the other races were polluting the gene pool. And so naturally, this started to evolve into narratives about, well, so how do we clean the gene pool? And so the sanitization of the gene pool, which of course culminated in what I already mentioned by Hitler, a killing of 6 million Jews. And by the way, the other thing that's not talked about is how the King of Belgium maimed and killed over 8 million Africans, a whole 25% of the population. You don't find this in the main history books. Yet this was underpinned by the same beliefs that the gene pool of the inferiors, and Africans were obviously part of this inferior gene pool, needed to be culled as much as possible. And so this genealogical hygiene, eugenics, which was a kind of derived from a German word. And so this gene hygiene, particularly in America, this was where there was a government really bought into programs where they were promoting the sanitization of the gene pool. And so there were some laws that were enacted, or precedent of cases where there was they allowed for involuntary sterilization of anyone who was considered to have a polluted gene pool. So if you had, for example, even if you were white, if you had epilepsy, you would be sterilized, or if you in some states, though not everywhere, or if you are considered to have defective genes, or if you behaved in an inferior way, so white poor people, for example, a lot of them were actually also victims of these programs. But the important thing here is this was common cause. This was common cause that government also bought into, and the idea was that we need to restrict and sanitize the gene pool, otherwise the white man may not be able to survive because they degrade. So one of the reasons why racial intermarriages were prohibited by law in some states in the US until the 60s, until the rights, civil rights movement. A lot of the states had banned intermarriage. It was prohibited by law because the whole theory was they were degrading the gene pool. So it was underpinned by this whole science of eugenics. Okay, and as I mentioned, the whole racial gene hygiene project was epitomized by Hitler. Now, the interesting thing about this is that this was also the beginning of the fall of this science. I think a lot of people, a lot of foremost politicians in America, when Hitler was rounding up the Jews and putting them in concentration camps, they were actually saying, well done, that's this, Hitler is doing what we should have done long time in America. But when the news came out that the 6 million Jews had been gassed and maimed and murdered, a lot of the foremost eugenicists started to distance themselves. Now, there was also, of course, at the time, there was also new scientists like Frank Boas, who was the foremost leader of the anthropologists who started to prove beyond reasonable doubt that the science, for example, of measuring craniums and all that the science that had been developed in this eugenics era, they started to systematically debunk that science. So that by the time of the human rights movement, I think the whole science of eugenics, most of the universities in America actually taught eugenics as a science, but by the time this science was debunked, a lot of the universities stopped talking or this as a science. So, however, there were foundations that continued to fund, even to this day. They fund research on proving the superiority of men. And so you've got a lot of, foremost thought leaders like, Ben Shapiro in the US, but there's a lot of in South Africa as well. I'm talking about academics who really still continue to believe on the superiority of the white European. The important thing here that I want you to notice is this was a science that was perpetuated and sustained through the university corridors and believed by the leaders, European leaders and American leaders. And so, by the way, a lot of the, I'm a church person, so I always say, a lot of the biblical hermeneutics were also birthed during the time when the white European believed they were superior. So it was quite easy for them to start to see why God had the elect. So they had the Bible to back them up. You see, they are the elect. And so the others are damned to hell, as Apostle Paul writes that they are vessels that are are destined, for destruction. And so they would read a lot of the biblical hermeneutics of the time, even today, they still prevail, were based on this reading of the scriptures. Okay, so what can we learn from this very sober, grisly history of humanity? One is that we need to understand that if you never question how you know what you know, you may end up holding assumptions that, because you believe that it's proven, it's said by scientists, it's done by this. So if we don't perpetually critique the assumptions we hold about what we think we know, we will find that our minds are the playground of those that dictate the agenda, the ruling elite, the wealthy. And that's what eugenics did. The common man and women in America believed that they were superior race, believed, and to this point, a lot of the evangelical theology and a lot of the other doctrines are still premised, they are still anchored on racial superiority. And this is why slavery was so hard to read off in America, because the Bible, they believe that, yeah, it is, the Bible supports slavery. And you had foremost thinkers in the US who defended slavery using the scriptures. These were eminent theologians. So and I'm saying that not to, just critique. I'm not saying this is a critique to Christianity or any religion for that matter. I'm saying it to say that if we don't critique what we think we know, we may well hold assumptions that may keep us blind to what we really need to know.
Beautiful.
And so this is, as leaders, we cannot just assume that that's common sense, common health theory. Racism and slavery and eugenics, these were common sense things for those that lived in those eras. They were just, it was like the sun coming and going. The white man was superior. It was clear. It was evidenced by the science. It was in the Bible. And so it was a given. So they were blinded to the truth, to the real truth about the fact that God created all men equal. So, and why this is important, I'm showing this picture here. I'm running out of time rapidly, and I'm gonna try and bring this to a conclusion. The reason why I think it's important for us to know, to question, to always critically evaluate how we know what we know, is because if you see in this picture, we've got this thing called filters. So as a coach, I'm always working with people, and I'm always saying that how you interpret events around you is the conclusions that you make and what you come to believe of the events around you is premised on what we call the filters. These filters is, their function is to assign meaning to the world around us. And so these filters, in NLP, we call it, they delete, distort, and generalize. In other words, they go look for what already similar with what you already believe and distort it or delete it or generalize it so that the external event may resemble what you already know. Okay, now, if you grow up believing and your whole identity is that you are superior, And so, and you start to see the evidence because you believe this. So your filters start to align everything you know, including scriptures, align, and they start to confirm all the things that are happening. They start to confirm that it is indeed as I was taught. And so a lot of racism that we see today is because these filters were never reformed. And so people still see, they still accumulate evidence all the time about their proven superiority. And so why I'm bringing this is that a lot of people, you may find that these filters, they are defined by these filters because these filters assign meaning to whatever happens on the basis of what they already believe. And so it's a kind of a continual reconfirmation process. And so as leaders, one of our responsibilities is to disrupt ourselves continually and ask ourselves, what are the filters that I hold that may distort, delete, and generalize what I see in the world today? What is it? How do I disrupt myself as a leader? Okay, so let me then just quickly, so maybe just to conclude is, so because when we assign meaning, then we retain it, what we call internal representation. So how we feel, which is the state, then drives our behavior. So as human beings, we are eminently susceptible to these filters. And so if you don't make time to sit and think and do research, you are a walking zombie. You are a robot. You are going to execute commands that the media, the mass media, has told you must believe. Okay, so I want to then bring this to a conclusion by just pointing out what I call the information chasm, and just point out that the link, as I mentioned earlier, to population control has been also, we need to be aware of what's been happening with this. What we see is that the World Bank, the UN, and Rockefeller Foundation. By the way, the Rockefeller Foundation was a big a supporter of the eugenics. They were a big funder of the eugenics movement. So they have been looking at so from the 60s, there's been this issue that the population explosion, particularly in the third world, is so it's a threat because more people means more emissions, climate change, so survival of the species. And so some of you may have heard about the book, The Population Bomb. It suggested that governments, can we just mute? It suggested that governments should focus on reducing population growth. So this was a hugely influential biologist, and he was starting to advocate that there needs to be this direction governments. And then of course, you've heard in these videos of conspiracy theories that you've received, the quotations on TED, and of course, often it's a misinterpretation, but there is a very strong move that somehow the population growth needs to be managed. And so Bill Gates, being one of the eminent funders of the UN, has a very strong voice, and so people pay attention to what he says. And so a lot of people then get nervous when they hear that he is talking about these ideas of population control. So this is another quotation where he's saying, the problem is in the poorest areas and the third world. And so people, naturally fear that, what if then use vaccines, and of course we know that the vaccine programs, Bill Gates has been a big funder of that. And so I am just putting out here, I'm not saying this is right or wrong, I'm just putting it out that this is the landscape we are navigating, this is the thing that people are fearing. Okay, some thoughts for us as leaders. I think, and I've already mentioned this, we need to really, and I cannot emphasize this enough, as leaders, we really need to always critically evaluate about how do we know what we know. And as long as your reference is going to be to that sermon or that person or that leader, if you don't do your homework, you must know that your mind may well be the playground of the ideological warfare. And look, I think that there's a lot that science has gotten wrong in terms of being funded and running the agendas of the powerful, but still I think there's value in asking yourself, is the material I'm consuming, are the ideas that I'm buying into, are they peer reviewed? If I'm gonna buy a car, I need to satisfy myself that it's got a history, a service history. I need to know how many owners has it had. I need to know how many accidents. And so the buying into any ideology, whether it's vaccine or anti-vaccine, you need to do your homework. You need to look what's peer-reviewed, what's not. This is, and I'm talking this as our responsibilities as leaders, so that we don't fall foul to the people who bought into their own sense of superiority. And we need to always be asking ourselves, whose agenda is this? Whose agenda is this? Who does it benefit? And finally, and I think this is probably the most important point, and then I'm going to hand over a chairperson. I am seeing a lot of leaders basing their relationships on the beliefs that people hold about vaccine or not vaccine, or believing in this or not believing in that. And I think that if we are to be mitigate against this risk of what I call the information chasm, and therefore the societal divide, we need to be careful to curate people only on the basis that they believe this theory or not, or this doctrine or not. So, because, whether you are looking at the Rwandan genocide, where the citizen killed each other, you start to see that when you start to formulate identities on the basis of the things that can easily divide us, we can end up on the other side of the chasm, and therefore we take away our ability to lead and to influence. And I think the bottom line here is that this is the terrain we are navigating. There's a lot we can learn from how eugenics was done and its disasters, and we need to really start as leaders to do our homework as it pertains to things that land in our desks before we buy into any ideology. Chairperson, I hand over back to you. I have exceeded my time limit by 11 minutes. I apologize for that.
Leadership, thank you very much. We couldn't have enough of you. Even the 11 minutes, we didn't, most of us, personally speaking from where I am, pick up that you have exceeded the time. But thank you very, very much. This was very, very powerful presentation, and clearly you did some work, and you're leaving a lot of us with question marks to go and find out what we know and how we know it, and if it can stand the test of time. I normally say when I speak, there's this big challenge that when you talk about something that a lot of people are not aware of, you stand the risk of being looked as a crazy person. That what is he talking about? Because half the time we don't allow information to be the guide of where we're supposed to go. We living straightforward with the preconceived ideas. And I think with the end of your presentation, you put it very nice about how do we know what we know? Has it been peer reviewed and all that? I really like that. So it basically says allow information to be the guide, because if you block yourself from knowing anything else, you are depriving yourself and even the information that you share with your family and friends, your children and all that. It's preconceived ideas. You could be a playground, as you put it, of someone else's agenda. And it is for that reason that we really wanted you to come and talk to us about the topic of eugenics. And I think you really did a splendid work. But I'm sure there's a lot of question that comes from the ground. People are listening. I saw some comments that this is absolutely amazing. They're loving what you're talking about. I saw a few comments also that we are raised to believe that makes us superior to females and across the cultures and religions. Should we transform this narrative? Yeah. So there was a very clear attention given to your presentation. And I'm sure there's a lot of questions that will be coming. I personally have a lot of questions myself and comments for yourself. But let me see if there's any hand that is up. Or it was Mr. Klaba who said he's loving this. So leadership, I have read a lot of material on the topic of eugenics myself. And I call the people who are driving this eugenic program the cult, because it's a certain form of people, as you said, who defines humanity as a certain class of people with certain physical looks and all that. And by that, they end up discriminating others who don't look like that. And I often say to people when I do talks that we are all victims, one way or the other. The issue of eugenics might not necessarily be a black thing. As you mentioned, the Jews, you also mentioned that even white people, if you have epilepsy or whatever, they feel that you are not ready, you are not right to breed. So they ensure that you are being, your breeding abilities is being taken away from you, whether you like it or not. So a lot of people have gone through that. A lot of families have gone through that pain. And today we've got family planning clinics. And if you look at what God says about we going out and multiply and being fruitful and all that. So I call the cult agenda anti-human. That's what I refer it to.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
my question to you is maybe I want you to be a little bit braver. Are you, if someone was going to say to you, is the eugenics program still alive today? What would your opinion be?
So in the book, Robert Sussman, the he so he traces he does a money trail, a money trace. There is a particular foundation, which I forget the name, that actually has continued to fund the eugenics program, and its focus has mostly been on the media space to continue to influence the media space conversation. So I think that there is a particularly there's a particular thread that is aimed at particularly white men that has been driven quite effectively, and it is funded by these American foundations. Um, and so, for example, there was some guys from I think it was the AfriForum, when we were the whole debate about the killing of the farmers. If you recall, they managed to speak to some of the most senior senators in America. So I think that the funding of what was formerly the eugenics movement continues to be invested in ensuring that the indoctrination, particularly of the white people, continues. And I think it is, I do think in South Africa is one of the target areas where there's a lot of white males that are given, indoctrinated with a lot of information about their own sense of superiority. And so yes, I would say that the agenda is still very much alive. It may not be in the in the mainstream, but I think it's very focused, and I think it's well funded, and I think that it has good access to the media spaces, and I think that it's still very much influential. But just how much of that influences, for example, our policy in government, no one will ever know. But I think a lot of the people that are close even to government policy have got ties, to this movement. And I think South Africa played a particular role during this eugenics movement. Our own, the then South African president would travel regularly, would attend these lectures. So I suspect that I would say that network continues to exist because it's very well funded.
Beautiful. Well said. I I pick up that a lot of people are not aware that Bill Gates' father is used to work for the Rockefellers, who are who have a foundation of eugenics, and that is why Bill Gates, even himself, is very strong, very vocal in his own voice, that the population needs to be reduced by half. Uh,
Yeah,
so I also want people to also get a context of when we talk about the elites, who are we talking about? Maybe we can unmask the elites, maybe not necessarily by name, maybe by its people who are very wealthy, the 1% of the world, people who have control over the media, people who have control over the banking system, people who have control over technology. So those are the elites basically who have a control over this. So it is very possible, as you say, that the movement eugenics could still be alive and kicking, because those who have money, they put terms and conditions when they fund or they invest in anything that they put their money on. So let me not also just go on and on. Maybe there's questions also on the floor that are emerging on this very important topic. So by a
uh,
raise of hand, yeah.
if I may just comment on the comment of Sabata Mzimela, I
Yes.
think Pastor Sabata Mzimela.
Yeah.
I think there's a very important element in what that the whole thing about male superiority. But what I want to talk about is a tradition, because often the appeal to tradition
Mm,
is epistemologically, it is often what will we will be told that this is tradition, and if you contradict tradition, you are going off. You are either betraying your people or your customs, and so or even your faith. And so there is a very powerful narrative of appealing to tradition that can often be insidious, because if you are always going to appeal to tradition, that means it's going to be very hard to critique what no longer serves us. And so even institutions, including political parties, you'll see that a lot of the debates get entangled in the appeal to tradition and not asking question of what needs to serve us now. What is going to work now, given where we are? And so this comment is important because I think the whole notion of using tradition almost as an orthodoxy, as in that if the moment you veer off tradition, you are you are a heretic, or you are not. So that what that does is that it makes it difficult for leaders to experiment with new approaches, new ways of thinking. And so I think the whole thing about gender challenges that we face in South Africa, you'll see that a lot of the argumentation is around a tradition. So if we are going to be, tradition is supposed to serve us, not the other way around. Tradition has always been invented by humankind so that it serves our cohesiveness. But the moment we start to serve tradition, notwithstanding what tradition is doing to us, then we are enslaved to tradition.
Very powerful. If it doesn't serve us, we are a slave to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's open, ladies and gentlemen, leaders, to ask questions. The platform is all yours. This is the opportunity. Remember that this program is designed to educate the nation, to have us as leaders have informed decision. This program comes from our first pillar of mental liberation. We need to understand why we're doing what we are doing, and that is why we bring such very great speakers. I see there's a hand up from Leadership Sipo. Babangos,
Leadership.
let's just play into it, Baba. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much, Leadership Vezi, for your always enlightening and thought-provoking lectures. I think what I've learned as well is that it's important to verify what you believe, why you believe in what you believe. And most of the time, it is true that we believe in things because we trust the people that we believe and on those things. And immediately they take us to off-road, we still do not see and are not willing to engage. I think especially most people, Christians like me who believe in the Bible, we don't spend time reading it and really understanding it. We'll take it from the pulpit and try to apply it in our lives without, and immediate someone start questioning it becomes a problem. So I think I learned today that it's important to know what I'm believing and why am I believing what I believe. So thank you very much for this eye-opening lecture. I really benefited, and I'll really stretch my horizons to get more information, because even the Bible says that my people are dying because of lack of knowledge. So one needs to really seek knowledge. Thank you, leadership.
Beautifully captured, dear Mr. Nkosi. Thank you for that.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Yeah, it helps a lot that the journey that you travel, and majority of the time it's you will find yourself in a population or in a group of or cycle, a better way to put it, maybe in the cycle of people who don't have the kind of information that you have, and you just have to keep going and sharing the information with them, so that you become the influence to the cycle instead of the cycle end up influencing yourselves. So it's a big challenge. I always say to people when I talk about subject as a club, this is just an example that I'm putting forward. Baba Klaba, I'm watching you. I'm coming back to you just after this comment. I say to people, subject is going somewhere, and it will keep going. And if it keeps going where it's going, that somewhere will soon emerge, and it as a social awakening, people will definitely see where that somewhere is. So Baba Klaba, Ogan Klaba leadership.
Before you go to Babu Klaba, can I just say this, because what you are saying is so important, leadership, that in fact, in the history of eugenics, it was almost the change of the tide from a common narrative where this science was debunked. It actually took one persistent man who went and systematically disproved every theory. He went to the papers that had been done in the American universities and the European universities. Frank Boas, he systematically, one man systematically started to disprove a lot of these theories. And so that single man eventually became a monolith, and the whole anthropological science in America was transformed because of this one man. So I am in agreement with you that even that we are at a point where this is no longer a common cause, this science of eugenics. It took one man to systematically debunk it. And so sometimes, as you say, we need to be prepared to go that lone route so that we can liberate our people, so that we can work for the liberation of our people. Yeah.
Thank you, leadership. Thank you. Leadership Kaba?
Thank you, leadership. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, Baba.
Okay, thank you, Chairperson, and thank you, Leadership Mncwango, for that very profound and thought-provoking lecture. I think it follows nicely from the last lecture that we received from our Chairperson that left us with a lot of questions and stuff to think about.
Yes.
So my question is this, and it touches on what Leadership Nkosi has just touched on, and I think briefly what Leadership touched on, the information age. In your opinion, so I'm going to try and structure my question and hope that it makes sense. I mean, we are living in a very age where there's an information overload. There's lots of fake news and fake information on all over social media, and particularly with the now generation, the woke generation, the 2K. Particularly on this issue of eugenics, do you think we are we getting, is that information there? Do people know about this? Or from my point of view, with this information overflow, it's almost as if it would be very easy for people to be manipulated.
Yeah.
What would be your opinion on this?
You know, Mr. Klaba, there was in 2010, in fact, Robert Sussman begins his book by saying that in 2010 he was giving a lecture in one of the American universities, and one of the foremost anthropologists, up-and-coming anthropologists, said to him, "How come I haven't known this until now?" And he was giving a lecture on the whole thing about eugenics. And so what we are faced with here, Mr. Klaba, is that you know that story about the narrative that it is the lion until the lion write their own stories, the hunters will always be the heroes. So the reality that we are faced with, and Mr. Klaba, and this is our challenge, is that whether you are talking about our education curriculum or even our policy, the tenets of our policies and constitution, the more you look at the foundations of the societies that we have built on, you start to realize, and I know this may be depressing for some of you, you start to realize that that narrative has been influenced by the elite few who are advocating particular agendas that are designed to continue to enrich them. And so the policy landscape of our continent, Africa, there's a book called The Political Geography of Africa. It analyzes how policy that was given by the World Bank and the IMF, how policies systematically entrenched colonialism or neocolonialism in Africa. And so now your question is really, I think the essence of your question is, so where do we start? How do we know where we've been, where we are actually going on the information that is serving somebody's agenda?
Yes.
How do we get to the point where we know what we are dealing with and where it comes from? And I think for me, this is a forum where we can meet and talk about these things. And I think if you look at the great societies such as the Greeks, what you soon find is that they really honored their philosophers. They really paid attention to their thought leaders, and so and I think our job, particularly as Africans, is to start to really gravitate to each other and to listen to each other, particularly those of us that are doing homework. Now, what you will find, go to any library today. Fortunately, there's a growing repository of, for example, decolonization narratives. But beyond these decolonization narratives, there are people who are really doing some hard work on trying to understand the underpinnings of who we have become as a society and how we may start to critically look at how our formation. But unfortunately, those people, they are not even given a day of light in newspapers or mainstream, and so they remain in the shadows. The only people that you will get to hear are people with populist, ideas, and they are not even deepening our understanding. So I think that the key is really to promote these platforms, such as the South African Leadership Gentlemen's Club, because this is where there is an open attitude to knowledge and an open-mindedness to be challenged. So I think we need to give ourselves time. We need to be patient with ourselves, but we need to be intentional to maintain these networks. We need to be intentional about thinking together, and continuously asking who's. So we need to be having a what you call a diary or a list of all the specialists that are empowering us with new knowledge into the new spaces, from theology to agriculture to psychology. They're Africans who are deepening our knowledge and understanding, and they are starting to challenge the things that we've assumed. But the problem is that they don't get spaces to talk about their work and to disseminate what they are finding. And so for me, this is the place where we can really start doing that.
Wow, thank you so much, leadership.
Yeah, great response. Thank you, leadership, for the confidence that you are showing in the club. Maybe also to add on your response, leadership club, and maybe also the one thing that you need to see to check is who is the supplier of the information, who is actually the source of information that you are consuming. I said last week.
Yes.
Yeah, I said last time when I spoke in one of the talks, I said, if you allow your personal experience to be subordinate to public opinion, you have completely lost your mind right there. So it should be very important for you when you consume information to say, who does it come from?
Yes.
And what is my personal experience with this person? So that was just a comment, additional response that I needed to add on that just to assist.
Absolutely powerful leadership.
So any more questions? Yes, leadership.
No, I was saying absolutely
Yeah, okay.
powerfully articulated. We
Yeah.
need to be very vigilant about the sources of the information we consume.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other question coming from anybody?
So there's a comment here from Awesome that, and I sympathize with the feeling of suddenly you realize that, hang on, I have not been that vigilant, and so I sympathize with this feeling of what can I trust now, and it can be unsettling to discover that our societal foundations are actually underpinned by some of the most corrupt ideologies that are designed only to extract. And it is unsettling to discover that our government policy to this day is often influenced by people with money and agendas, again, extraction agendas. And it is unsettling when you see that our government leaders are none the wiser. They are in the forefront, yet they are completely blinded to the realities on how the world works. The book that I shared in Chomsky, I think if you have an opportunity and you read that book, what you'll soon discover is that our governments, including South Africa, are often at the mercy of the international agenda. South Africa today sells frozen chickens from Brazil, not because there aren't any local farmers, but because a senator from America put that as a precondition for some aid to South Africa. And so rainbow farmers here had to retrench people because there was this influx chickens of low quality with a high level of antibiotics that could even be causing cancer. And I mean, I'm not saying that as a fact, but we know that there's been insinuations that a lot of these things are not good for our health. How does it get there? It's because we had a government that just submitted or succumbed to a powerful agenda that was driven, and they had none the wiser about the potential impact of that decision. And so what I'm saying is that yes, it is unsettling to discover all of these things, but I think it is better as leaders. We just need to allow ourselves to grow this awareness. I think in time, the quality of our decision making will improve because we can see the agenda behind certain things that are being driven. We can see and therefore we can be informed better, and our choices become much more quality, and therefore our decisions become better quality. So it starts with that place of dissonance and being unsettled. But I think the more you open your eyes, the more you read about the world we are in, the more you understand the responsibility that we hold as leaders, and therefore we can be better custodians for our continent, for our earth, and for our children. But it starts in that place of pain, of dissonance. But I think eventually we grow and we evolve and we make better decisions.
Beautiful. Well put. On that point, leadership, what do you say to someone who says, you know what, the more I know about these things, the more I become depressed, and the more I don't trust. Let me just be ignorant and just consume
Yes,
what I consume, and just not get myself in that space. What do you say to someone who's there? And
it's a
maybe that
very,
person is a family, it's a father, a leader, or a mother, a leader, who should be imparting wisdom or knowledge to the children. But they feel that this information is too dangerous for my mind.
yes,
I feel
yes.
depressed most of the time. Let me just not consume anything and just leave. What do you say to someone like
And
that?
just live and just enjoy life and not be troubled by um, it's called a God complex. You know, the idea that once you can see the evil that's perpetrated right under your nose, there begins to be a sense, there begins to be a sense of responsibility, and that responsibility can be overwhelming. And so some people, I guess, because if you haven't grown cognitive muscles of standing what you believe and for what you believe, if you haven't grown cognitive muscles of rectitude and just being the one that is prepared to be in the minority or go against the grain, if you haven't developed that cognitive muscle, it's easy to find yourself in that place. And so our education system is designed so that we can submit to the mass information, so that we can just be tools for the wealthy and just supply our skill sets so that the wealthy can continue to extract wealth. And so our very education system, therefore, has kind of predisposed us to being submissive to the information that's conveyed to us. And so what would I say to that person would be that, look, I think as human beings, we have to come to recognize that we are, as we are on earth for a purpose. And so we can decide whether we're going to live out that purpose and we're going to make a meaningful contribution, or we can decide that we're just going to be zombies that live from day to day. And incidentally, that's what President, what was his name? President Foster said. He said, the African is just but a baby. They are just joyful. They like to have fun. You know, they are like a child. They like, nice things, good things. And so we're going to just keep them there. And so that is the very intention. So I would say to him that, by you choosing to succumb and submit and let it be, that is the exact intention
Yeah.
of what these
Then,
systems want you to be read. And so it's your decision. You can succumb and be a zombie, or you can stand up. It's going to be hard. It's going to be against the wind. It means doing homework, reading lots of material, being confused. But then that's only when you start living. That's when you start making meaning in life. And that's what life is about. When we have to account at the end on Judgment Day, we cannot make excuses that, oh, I didn't know. We have to account that what did we do with what we came to know. And so I think that we owe it to ourselves and our future generations. I would tell them not to procreate, because what they are doing is then to leave their children to in a space. They are bringing their children into a space where the world of the zombified, and so they want their children to just execute the robotic commands of their masters. So they shouldn't be procreating. They should just live and die and live
yeah.
the good.
We must pull a eugenic on them, my leader. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful one. Yeah, I'm still taking questions. We have maybe just a little bit over 10 minutes to go. If there's any questions or comments, really, this is the platform for you.
I see
Leadership, you must
awesome. I see awesome is is saying Gunzim. I am sorry for some of the words that I use. The God complex is important because it is about that, once we know the difference between good and evil, then suddenly it comes with responsibility.
Yes.
And that's what happens to a lot of people who start to realize the kind of society we live in. When you start to find this out, then you can tell the difference between good and evil. A lot of people, because of our education system, our mass education system, because of our mass media, they can't tell what's a good or evil. They think, this is how life is supposed to be, and so they just move along and they live from day to day. But once your eyes are opened to all of these things, you now bear this responsibility. Now, this is why it's called a God complex, because the moment you start being able to tell between good and evil, you are like God. And so once you are like God, you carry the responsibility to life and to your environment, and that's, I think that's the challenge that we all face as leaders. We have this responsibility that we carry, and we know we have to stop living for ourselves, this hedonistic living of trying to just, I want to be happy. And I think the reason why in Africa we continue to struggle with liberating of the minds, which is one of the pillars, of course, of South African Gentlemen's Club, is that the massification of education and information and the influence of government policy has kept us exactly where we need to be for the sustenance of the continued extraction of resources from Africa. And so you will be happy, of course, if you don't know all of these things. But once you do, it just means that you carry a responsibility. You must do something about it. And I think that's the purpose for which God created us. The moment we know between good and evil, we now have to stand for what is good.
And another thing, leadership, I need the audience to just be careful that this issue, it's just not been discussed because it's one of the items in the agenda. Let's tick the box. It is very important that this issue is being discussed and it's been understood, because the cult has not just said and say, we have done this and there's been a pushback and we're letting it go. I did a video last time of awareness that there is institutions that have been built specifically for mind control, which also goes into the media, because that's where we consume our information most of the time from. I mentioned the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. There's a Trilateral Commission of 1973. These institutions have spread all over the world to ensure that they spread the mind control agenda of this elite, so that you feel comfortable where you are. For instance, you'll say, I've got my house, I've got a bond, I'm able to pay my bond, I've got a good salary. You have been controlled to live like that. Your life was not made to come and pay a bond and die. You've got a better life to live, and even more productive life to live, rather than an individualistic mentality of I've got a comfortable job, let me pay my bond and buy a Mercedes Benz and take my kids to beautiful schools and all that. So these institutions of the cult are really out there and they're pushing harder and harder all the time. While we are sleeping, they are busy working on how they can control the mind. So it is important for you. I said, when you say, I love this bottle of whiskey, I mean, you did not even create it. Why do you like it? Did somebody play into your mind for you to love that? And when you say my hair, when you know it's just a piece of hair that's been flat on TV because of the Kardashians and all that, somebody created that program. And that is why these programs on TV are called program, because they are meant to program you. And we call them entertainment, when in essence they are just containing you not to be yourself and just to live in that cocoon. So really it's just that I want to emphasize, that when you consume information, just know that there's people who are very intentional. I mean, leadership Mncwango just mentioned that you must be intentional, very intentional. And it's very true. You must be intentional, because the people who wants to control you, or the people who are controlling you, they're intentional about that. They're intentional about everything that they are doing, so that you remain contained. So that's just a comment that I wanted to make. And I see that there's no hand up. I'm not sure if people have been scared enough from what we have just mentioned. That's why nobody wants to say anything. So it is my conviction, leadership, that we as the people, we start looking at what we know. And I think there's a verse in the Bible, I'm not sure what verse is that talks about, once you know, it is your responsibility to do something about it. It is
Yeah.
well and good to say, I did not know God. But once information has been brought to you, it's a different story altogether. Am I right?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a verse, it is the glory of the king or of God to conceal a thing, and it is the glory of man to find a thing, or something along those lines, basically saying that our goal is to master life, and master our own destinies, and to be able to be influential. And so when we have people, when we have a system, a societal system that's designed to determine what choices people make every day, so that they can, because if I control your choices, that means I control your budget. And if I control your budget, I am in perpetual wealth. And so you can see that there's a huge incentive therefore for the wealthy and powerful to then control eventually what choices people make. And they do that through influencing government policies and to, you know, and I think there's lots of empirical evidence on how government policy and including, you know, what gets sold in your shop. I've got an avocado tree. I told you about this. I've got an avocado tree in my house, but I can't sell it at my nearest shop because there's a control of choice, which avocado you're gonna buy. And so I think ultimately we need to realize that the system is working as designed. And as long as the wealthy gets wealthier, the system is working.
It's running machine. I see there's a hand up from leadership Zingisa. My leader, the platform is yours. Please unmute and just lay to it.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zingisa Ngwali. I want to weigh in as well and say thank you to Brother Mncwango for the message that he has shared with us. I agree with a lot of things that he has said, especially the choice that we have, whether to remain zombies or to be informed. We must be grateful because information is available for us, for all of us. All we need to do is to be courageous and read the books that are written out there. First of all, Chairperson knows that I'm not a history student, but I haven't studied history, but I am a history student.
Yes, yeah.
Right. My history starts right from the Garden of Eden in the book of Genesis. That's where it starts. But because of time, I'm going to leapfrog, say by the time we got to the floods, God was fed up why he created human beings because of sin. So during the floods, sin was already 1,500 years old. When Jesus Christ came to the planet Earth to deal with sin, sin was about 2,000 years old. Brother Mncwango spoke about the 15th centuries when the Greeks influenced the world. There is history to that as well. It starts with the Babylonians. It comes down to the Medo-Persians, down to the Greeks, and then the Romans. When the Greeks came into the picture, the history of sin or the history of the world was already 3,000 years old. Now, you can imagine, you can imagine what is happening to our generation when the history of sin is already 6,000 years old or more than 6,000 years old. But to contribute to the verse that Chairperson was looking for, I have one of them, Proverbs 3, verse 27. Do not withhold good from the deserving when it is within you or within your power to act. Thank you for the information, my leader.
Thank you. You are muted, leadership.
Okay, I'm trying to unmute myself.
No, no, I'm talking. I'm talking.
Yeah.
Yes, there we go.
Yeah.
You were
Thank you.
muted.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, this technology thing. Leadership, I see we're running out of, we're almost towards the end of our time. And in the absence of any question or any comment, what will be your closing remark as we part?
So I once more, I think I'm deeply appreciative of this organization and this space, and just for us to converse as leaders. I value that you've taken time for us to have this conversation. And I'm really encouraging all of us to be leaders. And being a leader really means, and this is what this organization is about, being a leader means that we are prepared to take our people further than where we were when we came. And I think if we can continue to carry that responsibility as our torch, there's a lot we will be able to accomplish in life. So I'm deeply, deeply grateful for this ministry leadership, and I'm grateful for everyone here.
Thank you. Thank you, leadership. Thank you so, so much. We are actually very, very blessed that we have yourself to be able, and many others who come to the platform and share with us what needs to be shared. That's true leadership right there and there. And as I always say to people, this information is not hidden in a rabbit hole. Information is available. It's us who should avail ourselves for the information. Right now, we're sitting here. There's only a few of us. When the world has known that there's this lecture today, but people are running away from the information. And information, it's really not hidden. It's available, it's there. It's how we access it and how we make time and become, as you said, very important, intentional in what we do and in where to source the information. Once again, thank you so much. We appreciate your time, leadership. And I hope you'll be able to share the presentation. I know
Yes.
normally after the presentation, you are able to share it so that I can have Tepi send it to everyone who needs it.
Your office is
Personally,
very efficient on
yeah.
following up, so I'm sure I will be reminded.
Yeah, leadership. I will give you a call